All right. A very warm welcome. Good afternoon, 4 p.m. German time, Monday, as usual. Welcome back to another episode of PKs on Air. And my name is Bastian Grimm. Sadly, this week you have to cope just with myself, as Dominique is actually on her well-deserved vacation break. And so I decided that it would be a good opportunity to geek out on some tech SEO topics that might not be compatible with everyone. No, just kidding. We had a bunch of questions, and I saw a couple of things as per also our last episode, where we kind of started doing a bit of a newsy, covering some of the things that we felt was quite important, and I think that worked quite well. We got quite a lot of good feedback on that, so I decided to kind of stick with that format. And also there's been a couple of things that I've been playing around with in the last days and weeks, and I think some of those are actually worth sharing. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today. By the way, my apologies for being a tiny bit late. It's a busy day. Feels that work is coming back to somewhat normal, if that makes any sense. At least we see a lot more inquiries. We see a lot more kind of RFPs and whatnot coming in. So yeah, we are super busy, which is I guess a great thing. However, though, even though PK Sonair was kind of launched on the back of this crisis and the tough times everyone was in, we try to kind of just keep it running and make it as useful as it can be. That said, what I will be doing, and again, we are live on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, as well as Twitter. Feel free to leave comments wherever you're watching from. Happy to kind of answer them in between. And yeah, so I'm gonna quickly share my screen because I actually kind of pre-selected a couple of topics that I would like to share with you guys. I think as a starting point, there's a couple of links and articles, and we will be putting them into the show notes, of course, as we always do. But I think covering them quickly here probably makes sense. So let me see if this works. Oh yeah, and this time it even works with the browser. Perfect. So I think most people by now probably should have heard of what's called, or what Google calls, Web Vitals. This kind of goes back to a lot of the performance optimization topics that I've been talking about in the past. But also, I think one of the main initiatives is just to, I would say, reduce a bit of the complexity and maybe take away a bit of the confusion. And I think that confusion has mainly been caused in the past due to the fact that a lot of people were like trying to kind of get grips to how to make websites faster and work on the performance angle and those types of things. And there were so many different metrics out there. And I think it was partially also Google's fault, if you so will, where they kind of added this to Lighthouse, added that to Lighthouse. Then there was webpagetest.org, there was page speed insights, there were some numbers in Search Console, and it was all somewhat different. And I think it's actually great, and it was about time that they kind of moved away from that a bit, and kind of announced this joint initiative, what Web Vitals actually is. So Web Vitals in its core consists of a set of 3 metrics that are shown on, like, it's web.dev/vitals, by the way. that are shown here on the help page with Google as well. So we have 3 metrics that in its entirety are supposed to capture how fast the website is, but not only how fast it is numbers wise, but also how people perceive the speed, as well as, you know, if there are any interferences, I would like to call them, where interaction with the site is not possible. So, you know, just to quickly recap on those 3, and then I'm just kind of go over to what I want to share with you. There's kind of 3 metrics that Google is now focusing on, I would say for now at least. One's called largest contentful paint, or LCP. Then we have FID, which is first input delay. And then we have CLS, which is the cumulative layout shift. So basically for LCP, it's measuring the loading performance, right? So it's basically, when you try to visualize it, it's the time when the largest paint event in the initial view has been made. So let's say when we look at this screen, probably the largest element here is either where those 3 images are, or I haven't compared the pixels, or the section where it says Core Web Vitals, if it's wrapped in a div, that is, right? So, and then you could argue what is the most important one here, but basically, you know, when that is visible to a user, that's when largest contentful paint will be accounted for. Then first input delay is basically measuring interactivity. So the you know, it should be reflecting how fast or how much time is actually passing until you can interact with the site. And CLS is trying to solve a very annoying issue, which is that sometimes when websites load, things are moving around or they're jumping around. So you're trying to click on that link, and all of a sudden when the site loads or is still in the loading stage, that just moves elsewhere. You click on something entirely else. Oftentimes happens with ads. So CLS is trying to measure like the stability. So let's say the lower the number is in this case, so close to or 0 would be ideal, as you can also see in the references. And in combination, those 3 are trying to reflect really what and how fast the site is being perceived. That does not mean, and I think this is also very much worth repeating, it doesn't mean that metrics such as, I don't know, time to first byte, all of a sudden is not relevant anymore. I heard a lot of people saying that, well, but you know, Google confirmed that TTFB is not a ranking factor. Yeah, of course it's not, right? But if you have a high TTFB, then obviously largest contentful paint will increase significantly, because if the server doesn't even react, how is there supposed to be any kind of paint timing? So, you know, take it with a bit of like, try to understand the entirety of it, not just focus on 1 or 2 or 3 numbers. Why are those 3 numbers important? There has been an announcement made by Google at the same time, or more or less at the same time, when they released this. And for that, I'm just going to quickly pop over to a Whiteboard Friday that Cyrus Shepard did on Moz, where he's talking about the next, at least he calls it the next official Google ranking factor. And I think the reason why he says next official is basically because Google announced that you should be aware of, and that they will be implementing the use of Core Web Vitals or just Web Vitals into the algorithm early next year. It's a relatively basic but very thorough walkthrough with a timeline, which like the implications and whatnot. So yeah, if you're new to it, I would recommend you have a look. It kind of takes away a lot of confusion. I think it's a really structured approach to trying to shed a bit of light on what's going to happen with Web Vitals. There has almost at the same time earlier, or end of last week, sorry, post on Yoast.com where the guys are talking a bit about, you know, the 5 biggest things, or 5 things the developer can do from a technical side to kind of have a positive impact, if you so will, on Core Web Vitals. So fundamentally, it's web performance optimization, really. And again, I'm not going to go through all of that because there's obviously way more out there, but I found a quite solid overview covering some of the bigger topics, right? I think in every web page audit or web performance audit that we're doing over at Peak Ace, we are somewhat coming back with the need to optimize imagery. There's always something, wrong dimensions, not properly optimized in terms of like the format that's being used, or you're just loading too large of an image, or compression hasn't been done, whatever. There's a whole bunch of things with imagery that goes wrong or can go wrong. And on the other hand, the impact, if done right, is quite big, because obviously you're significantly shrinking down what needs to be transferred to the browser. The second thing here in the article is basically that you're kind of trying, or supposed to try, and make sure that instability is not going to happen. And instability appears, for example, and that's an example in this post, when, and this goes back to the CLS metric, right, to the shift metric. When you load an image and it doesn't have dimensions, so right, like in this case, it has a specific dimension of 640 pixels in width and 360 pixels in height. If you do that, even if the image is not there, the content around is not jumping. But if you don't do it, then the image comes in, the browser needs to repaint it, and then only then you have the final dimensions. So I think that's also really important, and a very, very simple fix in terms of most of the CLS issues. The other issues that I'm seeing a lot is either around web fonts, so like third-party fonts, basically, right? So fonts that are not directly installed on the local machine, but therefore needs to be downloaded first, and then they can be displayed. So depending on your font display strategies, you might say, okay, I want to swap them. And if you swap them, then of course that can cause, if you do it in the same view, that can cause like the elements to kind of jump around, for example. Or as I said earlier, it could be caused by a lot of advertisement, especially visual advertisement, that only will be loaded asynchronously into the page. And then since you don't know the dimensions before, all of a sudden it kind of, I don't know, it moves the content down or whatnot. So yeah, there's a bunch of things on CLS, but certainly imagery that you control yourself is a very, very simple fix. I mentioned this, so I'm skipping this through, but speeding up the server load times totally makes sense. There could be backend issues, could be routing issues. Preloading can make a lot of sense. And then what's also covered is one of my favorite topics here, because I think it makes so much of a difference, and that's critical CSS, or like generally the critical rendering path. So the idea here is to get the CSS delivered for the initial view as fast as it's actually possible. And to do that, usually you need to split up your CSS. You inline some, you load the other stuff for below the fold a bit later. And the article is mentioning WP Rocket, which has actually an embedded functionality in here. And then it's third-party scripts and a bunch of other things. So yeah, if you are not familiar with Web Vitals and what's in there, it definitely makes sense to have a look at those 3 articles. I think they are a really good summary actually on some of the optimization things and optimization potential that you can do and should be doing and should be aware of in terms of those or this ranking factor, if you so will, coming up. Again, we have no understanding, at least yet, on impact, and if Google is treating it similarly to web performance, where it says, well, it might only be like a negative if you're significantly slower than someone else. We don't know that. It's yet to be, well, either communicated or not, I would say. All right, so that's that. And one thing that ties in quite nicely is another thing, not so much from a web performance perspective, but it's still around what Google is doing and what are they respecting and whatnot. There's been a really interesting read on Search Engine Land, actually, where Chris Long is talking about or asking the question if Google actually is respecting, or you could say maybe still respecting, the URL parameters tool. So in Search Console, you have the possibility, and it has been moved to kind of the old section. You have the possibility to configure URL parameters, and then you can decide on, what impact that parameter actually has. So let's say, does it change the page or does not change the page? Should be crawled and whatnot. And this read, so I'm just gonna go through this very quickly here, is basically where Chris says, well, he had seen a bunch of parameters that Google was spending time on, and he wanted to figure out if it still really works. So basically what happened is he added like a bunch of parameters into Search Console, and once that was done, I don't know what the imagery is not loading here, maybe we'll try it again. No, certainly not coming up. Well, it worked earlier, so maybe you just try it later. Where basically the two, yeah, there we go. See, there we go. Okay, perfect. So you kind of, he added the URLs, says like that they don't have any impact and whatnot, and then used, I believe there's a Screaming Frogs log file analyzer, use that to monitor the progress, seeing or trying to understand if Google is, like, based on log files, is still crawling it. And it turns out they were not as significant, but they were still, even though when you checked it with Search Console data, so that if it has been reprocessed and kind of recrawled at that time, that was a yes. Still, they were going for some of the old URLs containing or having the parameters attached to it. So I found that quite interesting. It goes a bit back to what I was saying. Very often when I kind of cover crawling, crawl management, and those types of topics, I would almost always prefer that there is a solution in place, and that usually is a server-side solution that deals with this. So if you have an unwanted parameter, redirect it, get rid of it, whatever you do, but don't rely on the parameter tool. Also because you only do it for Googlebot, not for the other engines out there. So in an international context, for example, this might not be sufficient anyways. So yeah, use it with care if you use it. If you can, I would strongly recommend a server-side solution. Then there's been a bunch of rumors, actually, which I found also quite interesting. And I've noticed the same also in some of the European countries that I pay a bit of a closer look to. And it has been posted by Barry Schwartz on Search Engine Roundtable, but there's been like some discussion on Twitter and whatnot as well. So basically what you can see when you look at especially the data from Rank Ranger, that there has been a quite significant drop. So we were, I believe it was US data in this case, we were at like over 25% on average, where there were structured snippets and 20% on a bit below 20% on average with how-to or FAQ. And there was a drop already a bit earlier, so that was around the very end of June, but then it kind of went with still structured data snippets 22-23%, slightly decreasing, but a significant shift actually 3 days ago, where that dropped from over 20 to below 15, and same for FAQ, significant drop, like 18%, now around 13, and at that scale, it's quite significant. A lot of other people have been noticing it as well. Maureen Haynes commented on it, Stephen commented on it, Brody Clark said the same. So yeah, it looks like Google has significantly changed for whatever reason. I'm not sure if it's a bug or not, but the kind of, it looks like a bit more of an aggressive filtering, if you so will, on them returning featured snippets. So yeah, if you're impacted, your site is impacted, you haven't changed anything, it might very well be the case that you are impacted because of everyone else who's being impacted as well. All right. And then there was a really good read that my good friend Patrick Stocks released actually end of last week, I believe it was, which is titled How to Optimize PDFs for SEO in 7 Steps. And it's actually a topic that is not covered that widely because it might be a bit of a, well, let's say specific case. Not everyone is using PDF files heavily, but maybe as a quick kind of refresher, Google does crawl as well as index and then rank PDF files, similar to what they do with other file types such as docs or even Excel workbooks, XML files, and a whole bunch of other formats. So it's nothing really new, but PDFs are a bit of an interesting case, I think, due to various facts, and we're just going to go through that in a second. But yeah, basically, if you are using PDFs, then I think this is certainly a must read for various reasons. It's great guidance on how to optimize PDFs properly, because I think we all agree sometimes there is, well, let's just say there is not much alternative in regards to like replacing the PDF or something. So no, you can't, and then you need to kind of run with the PDF. But if you do, then there's a bunch of optimization work that you should be doing just to get the basics sorted and make it easier for Google. Secondly, if you're using PDFs, I think one of the advantages of that format is actually that, well, you can also use it for off-page work. Use it for link building, use it for branding and whatnot. But that only helps if done right. So I think Patrick did a great job, kind of summarizing those. I'm just going to quickly go through it, just like an intro how Google treats it. But what's I think a lot of his reasons are actually really, really valid, and I would agree with all of them. Tracking probably is the one that you can solve, but PDFs will always be somewhat not mobile friendly, so you need to kind of zoom in, zoom out, which is super annoying. Navigation is missing, which is also a bit of a problem, because I wouldn't say it's only because people have difficulties to explore, but also in terms of link equity distribution from a solely SEO standpoint, it's not really great. Similar to there's a bunch of things that you can't do, which you could do on a website. They are, because the content is relatively stale, right? You put it up once, you're not going to change it often. They will only be crawled very rarely. And yeah, I mean, of course, all like the SEO things, such as if you want to do like a no index or whatnot, you would need to do on a header level. So there's a bunch of it makes it a bit more complex if it's not an HTML document, obviously. There's a bunch of optimization recommendations in this one as well. I skipped the write good content. I guess that that's a given. However, though, Dominique would probably disagree if she would be here. But hey, she isn't. So we stick with the the tech things here. Title is equally true in comparison to having a proper HTML document title. You would need to have the same for a PDF. Because that's been used in the snippet. Again, here's a video how to do it, similar to a description. So there's a description field that you can actually use, which is then used as the meta description. So make sure that you fill out those properties, even though they're not visible within like the PDF itself, right? It's kind of similar to an HTML document, actually. Really, it's a hidden like meta level. File name is important. That still makes a difference in this one. When you include imagery, same as HTML, again, I might repeat myself here, but yeah, alt attributes if you use imagery, because, well, it's images, right? Headings, they are true for PDFs as well. And this is one of the things that's often very much overlooked, which I found always quite amusing, is that people are missing links, and links especially back to a relevant landing page, but also a link back to the homepage for sure, because only that way you would be able to kind of get link equity pushed through the main domain. The other way to do it could be that, and this is not part of the guide, I'm just adding this here. The other thing, what you could do, obviously, if you can't link for whatever reason, or you just don't want to, if you would have the same content and HTML version, you could then add a canonical header. So there's something called xrobots rel canonical. So that means when the PDF has been found by a search engine crawler, they would see a header level canonical tag, and that canonical tag, obviously, you point back to the HTML like landing page, and that solves also some of the issues that we came across earlier, where it says like, well, it doesn't have a navigation. So in this case, it would have a navigation because, well, yes, the PDF is being crawled, will be processed and whatnot, but Google will see the header canonical and then point back to the HTML, and then instead of the PDF ranking, which is also a problem in that regard, that if the PDF is relatively big, then the file first needs to be downloaded. So it's a bit of a different kind of experience when you're in the search results, you click on something, at least I want this to be there like instantaneously. So if it's a PDF, it needs to download. If you're on a slow connection, that's super annoying. So if you would canonicalize those together, then you would have a better experience because the HTML page actually comes up. PDF tracking is an interesting one. There's a couple of approaches in here that Patrick outlined that I actually do like. I mean, of course, event tracking. So like downloading a PDF, you can use like an analytics event, like an on-click and whatnot. You put it into analytics, and then you know that the file has been downloaded. Embedding is a way to do that. You could track the links that go out of a PDF when they go through a redirector. The impression tracking you could solve, for example, according to Patrick, using server log files. So there's a bunch of different ways on how to go for it. What I really like, and this is probably also what's important here, if you're not having a clue about your PDFs or competitors' PDFs, or you want to steal some of their strategy, our Ahrefs actually allows you to go for PDF files as well. So you can do like top pages filter, you find the PDF, and then you're done. This is not sponsored, but I think it's a very valid approach. Majestic does the same, by the way. So just you can do that there as well. But yeah, if you have sites that are somewhat, I would say, academia, I know insurance has it a lot, and some others, then optimizing PDFs would be should be part of the strategy actually, to just ensure that you get the most out of this one. And yeah, so that was that on that front. I have two more things that I would like to explore. So the first thing was that there was actually a tweet, and I'm just trying to find it quickly if I can. There was a tweet where let me see if I can pull it up quickly. There was a tweet that was actually talking. There we go. Yes. All right, let me quickly reshare the screen then. There was a tweet where someone asked, I'm not sure if it's Rian, but I think it's Rian. Sorry if I mispronounce it. And she asked an SEO question that reads like, do search engines actually notice CSS generated content? And her example was in a style sheet that she picked CSS selectors like before, but there's also another selector called after. And then you could add content in CSS. And Jono, if you're watching it, hope you're well, mister, long time, kind of pointed towards my direction because I did a presentation, well, almost a year ago now on the dot at SEO Oktoberfest. And then also I think a bit later, well, earlier this year actually, at Friends of Search in Brussels. And that was around PK's test lab and some of our testing capabilities and things that we've been playing with. And one of them was actually CSS selectors, funnily enough. So I thought that what I could do instead of typing a reply is that I can just share those screens and quickly walk you through it, and I'll just post it on Twitter later. So optimized use of time, but I find it quite an interesting topic. I just need to quickly flip into the presentation here. Yeah. All right. So basically, how it looks like is, hold on, it doesn't work. Why does it not work? Okay, quickly reshare it again. Now it works. Okay. So basically, what I was talking about and how CSS selectors work is the following. Essentially, what it is, or what they are kind of pseudo elements that are the first child of the matched element. So in technically speaking, how does it look like? So if you look on the right hand side, there's some HTML with a Q and a Q, like those tags, right? Q and then closing Q and then again. So the CSS below says Q before, and then you add like this sign. I don't even know what the English name for that is, and you add a color which is blue, and you do the same thing and you add the color red, and then you can see, oh yeah, there are quotes, obviously. Jesus, that was easy. Anyhow, what you can see as the result is the output. So what it does is basically, even though those quotes are not part of the HTML markup, but they live basically in the CSS only, nevertheless though, when the browser renders it, the output looks like as shown in the results section. So that's what it is. And so as I said, I was playing with that a bit, and I built this test page. This looks a bit similar to what you've just seen earlier. On the left-hand side, what you can see is a style sheet which is embedded into the HTML, and then there's option before, which is a long amount of text. And then on the right-hand side, you see the P class option A kind of a thing. And then for those of you who are familiar with it, this is obviously taken already from Google Search Console. So on left hand, we have CSS, on right hand, we have HTML. When you look at Search Console's preview, you would see what it would look like. So essentially, Googlebot seems to treat this identically to Chrome. So basically what you would be seeing in your browser on the desktop, on a smartphone. So that means the rendered DOM, it does remain unchanged, which is kind of expected, but the output looks as you would like it to be. So in this case, again, this massive block of first text that was only living in the CSS, it's there, it will be displayed, but it's not part of the HTML. It remains in the markup, it remains in the CSS and doesn't go into the markup. So it's not being kind of combined or flattened or something. And that, I think, is kind of to be expected because it's a pseudo class. So what does that mean? Basically, content from within CSS selectors won't be indexed. It doesn't really matter in this case if Googlebot renders it or not, the content will not be found. So the test here on the left hand, this is a phrase that only lives in the CSS kind of pseudo class. So in this case, in the before. And as a kind of comparison test on the right hand side is content that you have seen that was residing within the HTML markup. So long answer, but short outcome, what you put into a CSS selector won't be indexed. Therefore, you can't search for it. So why would you care? I think this could be turned around. So let's say you have to display certain content that often happens in pharmaceutical context, for example, but it could also be an e-com where you have, let's say, a shipping info, and you want to kind of create or prevent a certain footprint, then you could actually think of using those kind of CSS selectors. So yeah, that's the answer to it. So don't use it for anything that's critical. You can use it to remove something that's not critical. Yeah, up to your imagination. So that was the CSS selectors situation, I would call it. And then there was actually, I've got one more topic that I would like to share with you, which I also found quite interesting, which goes a bit back to what I was saying earlier with the Web Vitals and the Web Vitals kind of post. So let me quickly try to bring that up as well. If I can find it. So I last night was playing with page speed insights because I was curious about something that I couldn't really understand. I guess this is how most of the SEO stories actually start, right? You are curious about something, and then you are digging deeper and deeper, and then it just doesn't stop. This is at least how it goes for me usually. And I'm just trying to pull up 3 links for you so that you can follow what I was doing actually. Yeah. So basically, I need to reshare my screen first and foremost. That would be good. 1 second. Yeah. So I was playing with, and that could be any website, right? I was using some others, but this is just a recent example that I have. I was playing with a website that I run through page speed insights, right? So far, so good. However, what I did do before, so I should probably have done it in the proper order. If you're not familiar with it, so massive shout out to Max Prin over at MERKLE for his insane work that he put into technicalseo.com. And, you know, the amount of time, I would say, but also like just the set of features is really, really, really cool. So I was quite impressed, or I am quite impressed. I've been using it for a very, very long time actually, and there are so many really cool things. 2 things that I just want to quickly kind of like mention, but I'm not using it now. So there's a mobile first index tool where you can do like comparison things. So it compares desktop versus mobile variants, and it's super helpful because with a click of a button, you're literally done. There's bulk validation tools for AMP, which is also super helpful. And what I wanted to show you is this. So there is a fetch and render tool. You basically put in a URL. I'm using the same. I select smartphone. I say I want it to be rendered. I say Chromium, and then the rest I don't care about because I mean it's going to be German region anyways. And I do the fetch and render. So this now takes a bit because obviously, as I just said, the site needs to be rendered. So that kind of, well, they need to fetch all the resources and whatnot, and we're just waiting for the results now. And while we do that, I should mention that there was a checkbox, you can see it here in light gray. I didn't check the obey robots text, right? So here we are. This is the rendered result. URL, it is crawlable. It gives a 200 status code, all fine. I have the markup here, the HTML response, and I have the rendered output. So I have the screenshot over here. And then there's something that's quite interesting. So, which is this. So the following URLs would have been blocked from crawling. And I kind of looked at this, and I again had another example as well. So if you would go here, you say obey the rules, then you would see, okay, those below would have all been blocked. I was like, interesting. So let's rerun it again just for the demonstration purposes of this one. And I guess then you will know what I'm getting at. If it loads. Well, it does, but it just takes a bit of time. Yeah, as always, when you need it. No, it's fine. It's amazing for this being a free tool. There we go. So we have the render on the right-hand side, and you see this thing is entirely white, right? So there's literally no style and nothing. And I think that makes total sense because, you know, CSS is being blocked, JavaScript is being blocked, and all of those things. And as I mentioned earlier, I had a couple of other sites I was playing with where it was the same situation, right? So I looked at it, I was like, okay, this is interesting. So the fetch and render, and in this case, for some of the domains, I didn't have access to Search Console, so you know, I'd use this tool, which is great. So this is broken. And then going back to what I was showing you, I was slightly confused due to 2 things. So I looked at the layout shift score, which is really high here. And I think it's also one of the reasons why it doesn't pass like the core web vitals test. So I was like, okay. So when you scroll down, and you would see a lot of things like, you know, again, like the JavaScript, which is blocking the render, which makes sense, but also here, where it says, okay, the layout shifts, where it says, okay, there's some elements that contribute to the CLS, right? And those elements, when you look at the broken render, shouldn't have been there because they're not here. So I went on Twitter late last night, and Martin Split was so kind to reply relatively fast, super fast actually. So I was thinking that, maybe, so there can only be two reasons. PSI, so page speed insights, is not obeying robots text, or it doesn't fetch as Googlebot. So I was asking Martin if he could confirm, because in my mind, that would also mean that some of, well, let's say the communication around this is a bit hard, because, well, everyone thinks that what you see in page speed insights are the web vitals, and then the web vitals are the one metrics being used for this up and coming algorithm. But turns out this can't actually really be the case, at least not specifically, because, so, well, this was my question. So if so, I said, okay, I hope you're well. I have a question. I'm assuming correctly that page speed insights tool doesn't fetch as Googlebot or doesn't obey robots text. If so, would that mean that, for example, the CLS score could be different for what real Googlebot actually sees? Somebody said, well, yeah, that's actually true. So page speed insights does not fetch via Googlebot. So keep that in mind. It's not Googlebot in this case. And the metrics, well, complex, because the metrics search users are a mix of lab data and real user metrics. So keep in mind that, what you see there might be different for actually what Googlebot will be using, not the fact that they're not using CLS, but the value, if that makes any sense. So the number tied to the CLS kind of output, or the CLS scoring, probably better said, might not be what you are seeing here. That's very important. I think there's a bit of clarification missing, maybe because no one has kind of, well, it's a bit down the line, right? But yeah, so that's something that is very, very critical to understand, that, it's not one-on-one when I run this, that the score of like 0.94, which is very high, will then be the one metric or the number that actually goes back straight into search rankings. However, though, it doesn't mean that this number is wrong. It certainly is true. What you just should keep in mind is that Google actually, when they render, they see this. So this looks very different. So that means if you have two things next to each other and you're comparing like visual metrics, then of course those metrics might be different from each other. So this is what I'm trying to say here. So I hope that Google might potentially kind of add a bit more clarification to this. Yeah, so those were the topics that I had on my list for you guys for today. I'm just going to quickly see if we have any questions over in the chat. 1 second. All right, seems that we don't have any questions, but that's fine. What I would also like to add is, again, 2 or 3 housekeeping things very quickly. The one is that, and Dominique says hello, by the way. First and foremost, feedback is always welcome. It'd be great if you can just keep it coming, topic-wise, but not only topic-wise, whatever you feel is worth sharing, suggestions, formats, things. Please feel free to share them. Either send them to hi@pa.ag or just send me a message from Twitter or Facebook, wherever. And yeah, so the stream goes live afterwards on YouTube for those that are now not watching live, but we'll do that later. Please feel free to share and like. We are still not there in terms of our PK's vanity URL. So yeah, we highly appreciate any recommendations you guys might have. That said, next week, Monday, we will be back 27th, 4 p.m. German time. I wish you all a fantastic rest of the week. Keep in mind, it's only 4.5 days left. So yeah, have a great Monday and speak to you all very, very soon. Bye.